se sont contribués à façonner et à préserver le Canada d'aujourd'hui. Aujourd'hui, le 11 novembre, tous les Canadiens de chaque ville et village se rassemblent. Je vous remercie d'être venus en grand nombre ici, au cénotaphe de Whistler, afin de soulager les sacrifices qu'accomplit un chien combattant pour s'assurer qu'ils ne sombreront jamais dans l'oubli. Welcome to the Whistler Cenotaph. Here today, as with each November 11th, we come together as a community and as a nation to reaffirm our promise to never forget. We will never forget the young First Nations soldiers, numbering more than 12,000, who served our country in the time of war so selflessly reaching back across our history. Young men, barely men, from Annawapiscot in Ontario, the brave youth of Haida, the honored soldiers from Swift Current, and the airmen from Ganawake, united in spirit. For a common cause, they assembled by rail and ship, by car, and by rough Alberta trail. They assembled because they believed it was what was necessary and what was just in order to protect those values and ideals we collectively hold most dear as a nation. 2013, it marks several anniversaries for Canadians at war and of the sacrifice of those young men and women and so many more. This year we'll record the 95th anniversary of the signing of the armistice in the French forest at Campion, bringing an end to the so-called war to end all wars at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918. We acknowledge that 68 years have now passed since the end of World War II, and we recognize the cruel march of time, which inexorably is leaving fewer of those brave comrades in arms still with us today. Our combat mission in Afghanistan concluded in 2011, yet we still know that there are more than 900 Canadian Forces members continuing their dangerous mission there, working at tremendous risk to further the efforts of peace and democracy across that tortured land. And 2013 is the 60th anniversary of the end of the war on the Korean Peninsula and the Korean conflict. In what must have seemed far too short a time after the end of World War II, Canadian forces were called again to sail from our shores to defend the fledgling democracy of Korea. Under what is historically recognized as were some of the most brutal and horrific battlefield conditions, Canadian forces withstood attacks by overwhelming forces up and down the Korean Peninsula for more than 3 years. Sadly, Korea is sometimes referred to as Canada's forgotten war, but it has never been forgotten by those who bravely fought or by the friends and families of those who never returned. At times, the sacrifice and losses of Korea are underreported and too little remembered. Their stories of suffering not fully told, but their sacrifice is not lessened, the loss no tragic. In April of 1951, along the steep, narrow valley at Campion, Canadian, British, Australian, New Zealand, South Korean, and American forces withstood wave after wave of unrelenting fire and massive frontal assaults. After 3 days of close quarters contact, often in pitch black conditions, including hand-to-hand struggle, the Canadians and their allies stunted the attack and sent the enemy back in retreat. For this heroism under fire, the Canadians were recognized for their courage and for their stoicism against terrible odds. With a sweeping, historic gesture, the U.S. Congress awarded the Canadians the 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 1st Commonwealth Division, the Presidential Citation for their actions at Campion. This honor had never before been bestowed upon foreign troops by the U.S. government. Campion was truly one of the bravest examples in our history of sacrifice by Canadian forces. But of course, as often the fates, the defense of democracy came at a horrible cost. At Campion, Canadians suffered more than 30 casualties. Across the 3 years of war, 516 young Canadians were killed and thousands more wounded. And yet with the peace there came few victory parades and few grand welcomes home. Too soon the war, the sacrifice was forgotten as Canadians got on with celebrating the post-war prosperity of the 1950s and 60s. As we travel forward 60 years to today, it was with renewed solemnity and renewed understanding that Canadians recognize and understand the depth of those losses with the same gratitude. And yes, with the same sadness as for all Canadians who have left our shores in other wars to protect our freedoms and yet never returned. As free Canadians, we are obligated to discuss, debate, and even argue over the course of our country's future military direction and commitment. As we must, we hold these life and death judgments of our politicians to extreme scrutiny, and we demand thoughtful response. Going forward, we continue to uphold the tradition of democratic citizen questioning, activism, and even suspicion. But not on November 11th, not on Remembrance Day, and not at this hour. Here and now, together, we pause, we reflect, and each in our own way, we remember, trying somehow to desperately grasp the enormity and the toll in human life and suffering, struggling to fully comprehend, but trying nonetheless. We put away any cynicisms, we put away any doubt, we reflect, we honor, and we remember. So many young Canadians left their homes, their schools, their families from across the territories and provinces. Too many suffered the inhumanity of war. Too many fell, never returning to their homes, their friends, and their loved ones. Many of those who forever will carry the grief and sadness that comes from such personal loss. Today, together here in Whistler and across the country, we remember the sacrifice, we remember the individual, and we remember the whole. Beyond all reason, we try to process the incomprehensible numbers of those killed in war and in peacekeeping. We pray that Canadians will never again suffer such loss, that our military members, those young men and women, will live to become fathers and mothers, grandfathers and grandmothers, never having again to endure as so many generations have done before. On behalf of all Canadians, we hope and we pray that our serving members remain safe and at peace. As best we can, we truly thank them for their service, and we promise that we will continue to respect and support all that they do for Canada and Canadians each and every day. Merci pour ton service. Thank you for your service. They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old, as that we are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.